So I moved to Tanzania 11 years ago now, and I was still doing my degree online, or my master's, my further learning. A series of incidents happen, sometimes there's serendipity or one thing leads to another. And one of the most pivotal moments was I found two children abandoned in a street on the way to Rwanda. So I was in the middle of Tanzania, and these children were in the middle of nowhere, and I took them to the police station, and we ended up looking for their family, and the police said, we're just going to stick them in this orphanage. And part of my degree, I was looking into this stuff. My parents moved a lot for work or family. My dad was a little bit of a different character. He took me out of school when I was 14, and we just traveled around Russia and India and Nepal together for a year. So I had a little bit of an eclectic, upbringing. So at PAMOJA, we have a really solid team. I'm the only foreigner. The rest of the team are mostly Tanzanian social workers. Baby Project was a mother died in childbirth, leaving behind twins. All families that we work with, there's a series of seminars that we do. When we first start out, it's much more about psychological, because most families are dealing with trauma. It's really tough. And I think the way I've learned to deal with it is when you meet people in the toughest time of their life, you see that turnaround. Tanzania, that's not allowed. It's against the law. So you have to be a resident of Tanzania to adopt. Honestly, so I've got Abraham, our head of social work, and this guy's incredible. So hats off to him. He's wears all the hats, and he's out there with people. And then we've got a great team, Sarah. She's in charge of all things child development and home visits, families. And so I think it's a real team effort. We host a lot of students. Tanzanian students come in and do practical work with us, and that helps us to do more.
PAMOJA Lewo is a charitable organization in Tanzania that helps women and children. Their mission is to ensure that no child grows up in an orphanage, instead providing a loving family environment. PAMOJA Lewo offers essentials like formula milk for babies that have lost their mothers, and trains locals to care for vulnerable children who may have faced abuse or abandonment. They focus on education, supporting children from preschool to vocational training, and empower children and their caregivers to create a better future. Today, I speak with Georgina in Tanzania about the amazing work that she is currently doing. Hi Georgina, welcome to Inner Habit. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. It's so nice to meet you again after my niece's wedding. I think it's been, over 6-7 months now, hasn't it?
Yeah, it was the most beautiful wedding. It was lovely.
Yeah, we were all in Mombasa, taking on the heat, humidity. Then I had a sick child and we were in hospital. Yeah, it was a very interesting wedding. Look, thanks for coming on. And the reason you're really here is because of PAMOJA Lewo. And if people don't understand the definition of that, PAMOJA Lewo means together today. So I want to ask you about what PAMOJA Lewo is and how it all started for you.
Sure. So I moved to Tanzania 11 years ago now, and I was still doing my degree online, or my master's, my further learning. And I was very interested in children's rights, but no intention of doing anything, was just very much carefree. And then a series of incidents happen. Sometimes there's serendipity or one thing leads to another. And one of the most pivotal moments was I found two children abandoned in a street on the way to Rwanda. So I was in the middle of Tanzania, and these children were in the middle of nowhere, and I took them to the police station, and we ended up looking for their family, and the police said, we're just going to stick them in this orphanage. And part of my degree, I was looking into this stuff, and I thought, no, surely not. Let's try and see if we can find the family. And during this quite long story, I saw people, 20 plus people from a very small area, all come together to help these kids out and eventually get back to their family. And after that story, it just really struck me how many kids are out there that just need a community, a group of people around them. And so I met a government social worker in the town that I was staying in, Tanga, where I met your cousin. And I just started talking to him, about what was going on for vulnerable children in Tanga. And that same principle was stuck in my head. kids need communities of adults. And that's how it kind of got started. And I started asking questions about how kids were finding their way into orphanages. And he said, we don't have any data. And I said, okay, let's go and find the data. And that was literally the birth of PAMOJA after that.
Now, if you give the audience a bit of detail about what PAMOJA actually does in Tanzania, I know it works in a sense as an orphanage, but not really. I mean, there's currently a couple of structures that you tend to follow.
Sure. So our mission is to transform care for orphaned, abandoned and abused children, mostly ages 0 to 7. And so what that looks like is we believe that every kid thrives best in a family setting, when you have belonging, nurture, individual care. And so our goal is to work with kids who are at risk of losing a family and either help keep them in a family or find them an alternative family. So it's the same kind of kids you might find in an orphanage, except for you wouldn't know that we're an orphanage. Our kids all live in family homes, dotted around the community, whether that's their biological family, like grandma, auntie, somebody like that we support to keep them, or we train women as volunteers to take in other children. And so we have 3 main projects. The baby project, which is our biggest project, which provides formula milk and support to babies whose mothers die in childbirth or who are abandoned or abused under the age of 2. And this is we now work across the region. And we get referred babies from literally all over the Tanga region. So when a mother dies, the hospitals will refer them to us, and we support families to take care of those babies, usually by providing free formula milk and other support. Then we have our Family First project, which means we're supporting kids 2 to 7 with preschool care and after school care, and then mentorship for the female caregiver in their family. And then we have Project Hope, which is supporting children who've been exploited or abused, mostly children who've experienced sexual violence and girls who become pregnant as a result of that. And so those are our 3 programs that we run.
Tell me, you had a wonderful life in the UK, and then...
Yeah, I actually didn't grow up in the UK. I left the UK when I was 7 years old. And I grew up in Cyprus and the US and France and all over, and always travelled and always lived here and there. So home was a very interesting concept for me. So Tanga is actually the longest I've ever lived anywhere in my entire life. 11 years is the longest I've ever been in one place. So Tanga has, become home.
So what took you to Cyprus and all these places?
My parents moved a lot for work or family. My dad was a little bit of a different character. He took me out of school when I was 14, and we just travelled around Russia and India and Nepal together for a year. So I had a little bit of an eclectic, upbringing, which maybe is somehow to blame for how I ended up. I say to him when he misses me, I said, it's your fault I'm all the way across the world. You're the one that gave me the bug.
I kind of agree with that. Once you start traveling, you can't stop.
Right. Yeah. But
was it? Like, you didn't have to open PAMOJA.
It's an interesting story. I mean, I don't know what drove me. It's hard to sometimes fully know where the drive comes from. It just was always something really clearly in my heart, something I really cared about, the rights of children. I grew up in a family with a stepmom and a mum and a big family, and families always meant something to me. And it's always been something I've been really passionate about, is understanding why kids are separated from their families and preventing that. My whole life, it's interesting. I've always had this sort of little interest in the back of my head. And it was that one, I remember when I was sort of thinking of starting it, it was always like, oh, something you do when you're older, richer, more experienced. You know, this was like the excuse I always had in my head, like one day, someday. And then I think it's that curious nature in me. I just couldn't let it go. And I was asking questions, and one question led to another. And I thought, okay, well, why not now? Why not me? You know, I was kind of getting closer and closer to an issue. And I thought, well, I couldn't see anything being done about it. And I just thought, okay, well, I've got the background educationally. Let's give it. I did not expect it to be what it is today. If you asked me would I be here 10 years later, that wasn't in my plan.
Now tell me, Georgina, why is it important to keep these children, whether they're babies or kids or anything, or anyone really, why is it important to keep them with their family?
Statistically, we know that for every 3 months a baby is institutionalized in their first year of life, they lose 1 developmental month. So just brain development wise, the studies are showing kind of more and more and more clearly now that it really affects children's brain development. So, if we give kids a good start, that has a lifelong consequence to their ability. If we're stunting children's development in infanthood, and a lot of charity, I think, focuses on maybe the kind of how much poverty and these other things, but we're human beings. We feel, we connect. That's how we're wired. And if we don't grow up with a solid attachment, caregivers that are responsive, that one-to-one attention, it sets us up actually for a lot of challenges down the line. And so I'm really passionate about that kind of early period of life, that first sort of 7 years, is the kids that are disproportionately affected throughout their lives are the ones that didn't get that nurture and the food, the love, the care in that first 7 years. And so that's why that's particularly important, is because it has such a long-term consequence to the children. And then the stats come out, they're more at risk of sexual exploitation, physical abuse, dropping out of school, getting involved in so the long-term social consequences of adverse childhood experiences in that first period, the knock-on effect is huge. And so it's really trying to work on that early childhood to make sure that part of life is what all kids need, which is nurture and love and somebody that's their champion.
That's just amazing. Like, when I hear what you're explaining to me, and just the fact that you actually provide formula is such a big thing, because I know of orphanages that cannot, or they couldn't provide formula. And I remember going to an orphanage back home, and I remember seeing a baby being given to that orphanage for whatever reason, and they didn't have enough milk for that child. So it's just like, it warms my heart that you're doing so much to help these children, to be honest. And this is why you are on this platform, because and whenever I tell people that I'm interviewing this person or that person, they actually turn around and say to me that if you've chosen them and if they're on your platform, then they must be something special. And I just had that comment 2 days ago. So that's why you're here, to showcase what you do out there in Tanga, what you do out there in Tanzania, and how you help these children. Now, you're in a country that is so different. The rules, the policies are different. And with that comes trouble, because occasionally it does. I'm not saying it's always the case, because, it's just very tricky. Tell me how you navigate such challenges.
Yeah. So at PAMOJA we have a really solid team. I'm the only foreigner. The rest of the team are mostly Tanzanian social workers. And so there's 10 of us, and I think that really helps, because it's a kind of hive mind of different people bringing in their different perspectives and helping to navigate, those different things. I think a really important thing is we've always tried to take the law in Tanzania, take the policies and work with that, and actually most of what we're doing is what is written in law, or the African Charter of the Rights of Children. We're trying to take that and like turn it into a practice, not just words on a paper, but how do we put so that helps us, because then we can always go back to the theory or the philosophy behind what we're doing, even if it's maybe countercultural. If it comes from a good theoretical base, or a place in law, or a place in rights, then it helps us with moving that forwards. And I think the team that I work with, they're incredible. So we're very sensitive sometimes a social worker will tell me, Georgina, your presence would make this worse in that meeting or in that setting. And I'm like, cool, I take your judgment on that. We're kind of open. If we're aware of the dynamics of, being foreign in a different country, it's important to keep that. And they'll tell me, this one maybe sit out, or maybe, so you've got to be, I think, sensitive and aware to different dynamics like that. But it is hard, sometimes as an organisation, if people think that it's got, foreigners funding it, that it changes the maybe what people perceive, even if it's not what you're saying. They think, oh, it's going to pay all my school fees. You're like, whoa, expectation management here. Things like that are a challenge. But I think that's where having a good team helps kind of mitigate that a little bit as well.
So you do speak Swahili as well?
Yeah, my Swahili is pretty good. It's pretty good.
Well, you need to know the local language if you want to get anywhere, right?
Yeah. Although my kids are better. Kids learn much faster than my old brain.
So tell me about the young girl that I met during the wedding.
And that's my daughter. So I have two children. I have a son and a daughter. My son is biological and my daughter is adopted. And so I adopted her when she was 18 months old. And my son was 10 months old at the time. So I went from I had two kids in less than a year, which was intense. I'll say for sure. And so I do foster as well, but only sometimes. So I'm a registered foster parent, but I only take very small babies for a very small period of time, waiting for their more longer term placement. But my daughter, she's adopted.
No, I know that, but I was going to ask you, what made you want to adopt her? You had one son, 10 months, and then you go out there and go and adopt an 18-month-old baby.
Yeah, I don't know why. Again, it was something I was always open to. My stepmother is a big part of my life, so I kind of always grew up with this feeling that love doesn't have to be blood. That was not a hard concept for me. That was something that was sort of innate in me, because I'd felt mother's love from somebody that wasn't my biological mother as well. So I think that maybe has something to do with it. I just really believe in the importance of family. So for kids who have no other family life options, I think it's important that all kids have a family. And my daughter, she's just pretty special. She kind of took my heart. And that was it.
I remember seeing her during the wedding, and she is such a beautiful girl.
Yeah. She's gonna do something in life. She's one of those little, I think your daughter's similar, big personality. It's really hard to parent when they're young, but you're quite like, I want you to keep that spirit because it's going to take you so far in life when you're older. As your mum right now, sometimes I wish there was less sassiness, but in life, keep going. That's definitely how I feel anyway.
Yeah, good one. I think she'll do fantastic. She was like my daughter, Bossy Boots. I remember seeing her. Very, very independent as well.
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of growing up in Tanga, it's a very different childhood. So both my kids, I think you grow up outdoors a lot more than you would if we were living in other parts of the world. They grew up very, much more hands-on, practical stuff. I just think is the nature of childhood here is a little bit more outside.
I totally agree with that, Georgina. My kids do not know what it is to grow outside, whereas my life, like your children's, and I suppose yours, is more outdoorsy because our internet we didn't even have internet. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it definitely. My kids are mostly outside, and we go to Europe, and I remember that we were visiting my parents once, and they were like, how do you make friends here? There's no kids in the street to play with. And I was like, that's so interesting. In their world, you just step outside and there's kids to play with. And they were there like, in Europe, like, it's very hard to make friends, mummy. There's no one to play with.
Now, going back to PAMOJA level, how do you connect with the locals to implement your programs? Because I think that plays a big part. If that program isn't accepted, then it isn't necessary that that baby or child is going to come to you.
Mm-hmm. So when we started out, what we were doing 10 years ago was quite radical. So what we were saying was, how do we help families keep their children? And so it was more of a theory, and we just said, let's start small. Let's just start with one or two people. And the founding story, for example, of the Baby Project was mother died in childbirth, leaving behind twins. And we had a training actually that day about something else. I can't remember what it was, but I think it was something to do with business skills. And no one was paying attention. And we stopped the session and we just said to the ladies what's going on? And they said, oh, this mother died today. And the kids, no one knows how they're going to get fed. They've got no money and grandma doesn't know what to do. So we went down and we'd already been talking about this baby project idea. And we just said to the grandma, do you want to keep these babies? And she said, absolutely, but I can't feed them. We said, okay, if we could provide you the milk and the support each week, would you keep the babies? Because she was about to go send them off to the orphanage. She said, for sure, of course I would. And so it just started with one. And then when you get one, then people see, and then slowly one clinic said, hey, we've got another baby in that same scenario, the clinic that grandma went to. And then early adopters, and it was just this slow progression. And now every clinic and hospital in Tanga will call us without fail. I mean, we got invited off of the back of that. People started seeing the success. These babies in the past would have been extremely unwell, fed on cow's milk, from infancy, or watered down porridge, all being abandoned. And in the 4 years we've been running, the last 4 years of the baby project, no baby has entered an orphanage because of our project. A traditional, no baby's been abandoned. All the babies are in families. And the clinics were seeing that the babies were doing so much better. So starting small and not sort of preaching I've got the right idea, just saying, hey, let's work on something. Let's try something different, and responding to that feedback. And slowly, I think the proof is in the pudding kind of thing. When people see results, it speaks for itself. And so that's how we kind of scaled up slowly over time. And now, we get referred every year, almost 100 babies now, which is a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say that is a lot.
It's a lot.
I would have thought somebody say about 20, 30 babies, but 100.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of babies every year. And the milk is a lot. It's a lot of formula milk that we're going through. It's a struggle, but the results are amazing. And so we did a deep dive into the first 100 babies we worked with. And the data from those first 100, those babies were 0.4 kilos above average of the WHO standard for a 6-month-old once they reach 6 months old. So previously, these were babies that would be typically very underweight, very undernourished. And then we saw in our program, suddenly, they're actually exceeding, very marginally, but it just shows what happens with intervention, And so that's what motivates you. Like, well, hang on a second, if we can ensure these babies are getting what they need in their first year of life, like, we've got to make that happen. Can't stop now. And if people are referring babies to us, we want to always be able to say yes, because really there is no other options. So what else are you going to do except say yes? It's like, where else are you going to send this family to? What are they going to do without the milk? It's pretty dire.
Yeah, Georgina, tell me something about how you support the organization, or how individuals support the organization, because you can't do this on your own. You need that support.
So I didn't get into this to be a fundraiser. I hate fundraising. It's not my skill set. So I'm more passionate about projects and people, and that's kind of my background is children's rights. So it's a little bit trickier for me. It's just been word of mouth, lots of small businesses just giving little bits of money on a monthly basis, sharing our story with people. What I like about PAMOJA is we've never been dependent on one big donor. It's lots of little donors, which has allowed us to be quite flexible in the way we approach our work, which I like, because it means that we're responsive to our clients rather than responsive to a donor, if that makes sense. The donor's not dictating the project. Actually, we're able to use our expertise to really do what's needed, which I like. But it's individuals. It's individuals in the US, Canada, England, Cyprus, Singapore. We've got Australia, actually. We used to have quite a lot of donors in Australia, all over. And that kind of, all those little bits together sort of make it tick over.
It is stressful, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can obviously donate from the website, I saw. Yeah,
so on the website, people in the US, there's different ways of donating depending on where people are, but the website's definitely the easiest way to donate. There's different options on the website. And then every Christmas we do a big campaign, and it's just about to come up in a couple of weeks, where we get most of the funding for our milk project specifically, where we have a foundation that matches donations. So everybody that donates in this sort of week period, the money's matched up to £9,000. So that becomes £18,000. And so that's a special link that goes out over Christmas period. So that's another way that gets on our social media and stuff like that. So there's different ways.
Right. And when does this come out? This year?
This is in the second week of December.
Right. Okay.
But we do have a monthly giving on the website, and that's really helpful. You know, those monthlies keep us going. You know, pay school fees, pay, you know, social workers to go out, put the fuel in the car to get to babies, things like that, buy the milk. So the monthlies are really our kind of like bread and butter, but that specific campaign is just that week for one-off donations, which we use to buy a lot of that formula milk for the beginning of the year.
Now, how does financial education fit into your support when it comes to families and women in particular? I think that is important.
Yeah.
Do you sort of give them any sort of training around budgeting and financial education?
Mm-hmm. So all families that we work with, there's a series of seminars that we do. When we first start out, it's much more about psychological, because most families are dealing with trauma. So we're dealing with the psychological elements to get people out of that kind of fight-flight moment. And so it's a lot more counselling based. The second load of seminars is generally around childcare, child development, what children need. And then lastly, we move to this sort of thrive section. Once families are out of that crisis stage, things are going, the baby or the child's needs are a little bit more met, then we jump into, okay, what's next? What does the future look like? And so we have a series of seminars around financial literacy. We've developed tools to work with families of different literacy levels, so illiterate families, illiterate families. And we've done different things over the years. Sometimes we support families to go on courses so they can upskill themselves. Sometimes it's just helping them with better business management. So they've got a small business and just helping them with the skills to, run that more efficiently. But the truth is, it's really tough because one crisis can just wipe a family out. You know, people try and save, and then one hospital bill can really just pull a family back down. So I've noticed that there is always that kind of risk when you're so close to the poverty line or below it or under it, that want to climb out can be really demotivating, because it's not always how hard you try. I've seen families try so hard and just, one medical bill and that's it. Right, lost the business you've just spent the last year trying to build, and things like that. So it is very difficult. There's a really nice system though here in Tanzania called Vikobas, which are like community groups, and we've supported a few ladies to form these, where it's like saving groups amongst groups of women, and so everybody puts a little bit in each month, and then each person gets a turn to pull from that pot. And so it's like a small loaning system which allows families to do bigger purchases, or handle a crisis without it wiping them out. And so we've supported a number of those kind of groups to form. And then another thing I think's really been very powerful that we've done is mentorship. And I think that's in anything. Finding families in different, similar scenarios, but maybe a family that's 2 years maybe ahead, and helping them connect, and just allowing people to see something in practice. That sort of, I found a lot of times the theoretical doesn't work as well as that real practical. Go and sit with another lady that's running something similar to you, who's doing it well, and even if it's on a very small scale, a lot of that's been really successful. So that mentorship kind of relationship works really nicely.
Now, you've got so many projects in the pipeline. How do you manage all these projects?
A great team, honestly. So I've got Abraham, our head of social work, and this guy's incredible. So hats off to him. Who's wears all the hats, and he's out there with people. And then we've got a great team, Sarah. She's in charge of all things child development and home visits, families. And so I think it's a real team effort. We host a lot of students. Tanzanian students come in and do practical work with us, and that helps us to do more. I'm a little bit of a fly by the seat of my pants kind of person, and I think it works quite nicely for this context. I'm definitely not my lists and all of that, so I think it does help me to juggle a little bit. I'm quite good at juggling, and then a team. So I juggle, and then the team sort of, I think, helps to keep it all going.
So what strategies do you use to avoid burnout?
It's a really interesting question, and I think honestly, the truth is I didn't avoid it. So just around COVID time, just before COVID hit the world and during it, can hand on heart say I had a really terrible experience with burning out, and it's a horrible thing to go through. I just hit a wall. I think there was so much going on in my personal life, and I was just taking on too much. The work never ended. And so having gone through it, I think what I learned was you can't pour from an empty cup. And I've made that such a key part of my life now. My room is my sanctuary. I have like my bedroom, and I've turned it into this little sanctuary for me. And I have these little rituals that I say no matter what I do, no matter how many things there are to do, you know, some of those little self-care things. And for me, it was originally as simple as just drinking enough water. I know it sounds so silly, but I said to myself, every day you've just got to drink enough water. And I started focusing on just developing that habit, because I'd get dehydrated just running around doing all these things. And then just putting in that little social life, you know, actually, I do need to pause. I do need to stop. I do need to go out with my friends and let off, you know, my own. And I didn't do that. And then I did hit burnout, and it was really sad, because when you hit it, you realize, oh gosh, I can't go on like this forever. And so if I burn out, then I'm useless. Actually, I become even more redundant. So it was definitely a powerful lesson to self-care isn't selfish. And that was the lesson I had to really internalize, you know, because it's easy to say, but practically, I think deep down, I didn't believe that until it really hit me in the face. And then I actually got it. Actually, self-care isn't selfish. It's essential.
I totally agree with you. I think when you're running a ship this big and so necessary, you need to take time out when it's necessary.
Yeah. And creating a little bit of distance as well helped me. You know, we had some cases, and it becomes so personal. I live across the road from the organisation. You know, if a kid was in need, it would become so deeply personal. And I had to sometimes take a step back and put that little bit of distance in, because I didn't care. Actually, to care, I needed to be emotionally well, you know, and distant myself. And if I was so invested, I wasn't effective anymore. And that was hard lesson to learn, because I was so passionate, and actually learning my role was to be maybe a little bit more a step back, and still have the heart for it, but to be able to know how to manage that. I can't get too emotional about it all the time, because I need to be able to do my other part of my job in life. And so that was also a big.
You know, that feeds into my next question, actually, which I've always had in my mind that I was going to ask you. And that is, you see these grandparents lose their children, the wives or whoever. And there is so much trauma that they're going through. You know, you see the tears, you just see so much pain. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's really tough. And I think the way I've learned to deal with it is when you meet people in the toughest time of their life, you see that turnaround, and that's the bit you focus on. So you kind of become really passionate about that, you know, what can we do? And then you look at the kids, you know, I've got kids that I've worked with for 9 years now, and I see those babies that once hospitalised now are going off to school, and you have to focus on those. The turnaround part, you know, we've worked with so many severely traumatized children. It keeps you up at night. It does keep you up at night, but you focus on what you can do, and you focus on those little elements of change. And our team are really good at celebrating like the smallest wins, you know, are the biggest celebrations, because that's what keeps you kind of going. Is yes, there's sad, but if you focus on the little change, the little bit of good, then it keeps you kind of motivated to keep moving on. And I've also worked with a lot of therapists from around the world who've come in, and they actually offer talking support for free to myself and our staff, because we realized when we were dealing with such serious cases, sometimes the kind of secondary trauma that it was having on our team. And so we've had a couple of therapists offer to provide that kind of talking support to us as a team. Even my staff, my social workers, they have somebody that they can call. And that's been really valuable as well, to make sure that nobody does get too overwhelmed by what we're, facing.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that is really important, particularly like 100 children. Like, when I think of it, there must be so much going through you guys. And it is so necessary to seek counseling if necessary, or to get therapy if necessary. And I feel that a lot of the world is very shy, or they just feel like they don't need therapy when they need it, or when they need counseling, because they say, oh, I'll be fine. It's just a block that they have. Whereas it's accepting that these things are happening that make a difference, and seeing how you can pass each challenge.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of the team, even the ones that were more reluctant, like, how am I getting help when my client's the one that's suffering? And I said, well, actually, you're the example. You're showing what it looks like to accept and receive help. And that's important, because then you actually have more empathy for your clients. To be emotionally healthy and well is a service to yourself and your clients as well. And I think it is, again, it's that self-care isn't selfish. It's quite hard to internalize that, but it is true. We can't give if we've not got it. And if we're, built up with all the stress, equally, not becoming too desensitized too. So that tougher, getting that too tough. It's all about getting too soft, but actually too tough. Finding that balance. Actually, if you've stopped caring, that's a problem too. If you're too desensitized, what makes you your superpower is that you do care. And so finding that balance, that you don't become desensitized, is also equally important, whatever it is you're facing. I think when we become too tough, we lose some of that kind of passion or zest for whatever it is that we're doing, because we've shut down in order to keep going. And that whatever we're shutting down, I don't think allows us to be as full as we could be out in whatever we're trying to do. Is if we've shut a bit of ourselves down, then we're less effective, actually. Even if it's what helps us survive, we've all got to get out of that survival mode. Ideally, if we can, if we've got the resources available to us, it's shifting that mentality a little. It's hard though. It's a hard leap.
Yeah, I was going to say, on one hand, you want to be sensitive to these children. You want to give them the love that they deserve. But on the other hand, you have to keep that balance of knowing that this child may go to a better family in the future. And that must be so hard.
I think it's a privilege. We always have to talk about this. We work with lots of foster families who have children for, maybe a smaller period of time whilst they're awaiting something, being adopted by another family or other more suitable families found. And I just think it's a really great lesson of love isn't selfish. It is a selfless act, and you've got to love. And with that sort of thing of saying, if something else is better for you, I'm going to cheer you on. And I'm the adult and I take the grief, because you got to love and you let go and you'll feel sad. But a lot of the times when we're talking to the adults about this side of it is saying, isn't it amazing that we take the pain, not the child? I'm taking the pain of letting go, so you didn't get the pain of being unloved. I got to love you fully whilst I was with you. And then if something, if you move on, at least I got to, whoever the adult was, got to absorb a bit of that pain. And isn't that better that we're taking the pain off the kiddie, and we've got the tools to deal with that a little bit better than they do at their little age. So.
Do you get children being adopted by families abroad?
No, so Tanzania, that's not allowed. It's against the law. So you have to be a resident of Tanzania to adopt. And all of the adoptive families that we've worked with are local, are Tanzanian families. So all the kids and the foster families are all local families.
Do you have checks that you do on the children after they're adopted?
So it's all run through the government. So we're just supportive. So we'll sort of help do that. And we have our social work team who sometimes works with them to do some of the work. And we do tend to keep in touch with all of our kids. Generally, we kind of got tabs on them, and there's at least a yearly checkup on, how everyone's doing. And most of our work is sort of generally a program's maybe 2 years of direct contact, and then we phase it out. So the third year might be a little bit more light touch, fourth year a high, depending on the fact. And we have some families we've worked with for 7 years, and we might still continue to work with them because there's just so much vulnerability going on that we're still a little bit more in touch than others.
Now, what is your long-term vision? I mean, you're probably going to sit there and say, I don't know what's going to happen next year, and I get you, right? Because it's tough. But what is your long-term vision? You probably have something there.
So one of our big goals is we want to kind of expand what we're doing, but rather than expand physically ourselves, our goal is to become like a center of learning of best practice, and so to work on inviting other organizations to come in, learn and replicate some of the models of care that we've been using. And we've started doing more of that, and we'd like to continue to do more of that. Because I think that will help to spread we've done a lot of work on really creating like an evidence-based practice, really measuring and looking at the ways that we're working. And so spreading that model, I think, is an important one for us. That's how we'd like to scale our impact, and doing a lot more work on awareness raising and more policy level, things like that. It's like we're venturing more and more into.
So you talk about partnerships in a sense, like the people you want to partner with and get that sort of support and stuff. What sort of countries do you tend to get that partnership and support from?
So it depends. So we've been worked a little bit with the British High Commission, and they've come down and had a little look of what we're doing. We're a small organisation, but some of the work has been, seen and by different organisations, and so we've done a bit of work with them. As I said, we've done a bit of work with some Swedish organisations as well, some church groups. Not that we're not religiously affiliated ourselves, but we kind of will work with anyone that wants to work with us. As I said, we had a lot of our donors, particularly, or groups that we worked with, are from the US, UK or Australia. That's been mainly where our support has come from in that way. But within Tanzania, lots of work with other inter-Africa kind of groups as well. So we're part of this Transform Africa Alliance, which is an alliance of organisations all over Africa as well, who are working on a similar mission. So I think we try and partner up where we can. I think that's the best way, is to work through people, work collaboratively. I think that's usually the best way to go. So yeah, pretty open. So for us, for example, one baby drinks about 2 tins of milk a week. That's a good gauge. So 2 tins of milk a week. So that's about, 10 tins a month, approximately, depending on, each month. And 1 tin here is about $8. So it's not cheap. It's not cheap to keep a baby fed. But in the scheme of things, because if over that life of that baby, the impact that's going to have, if you don't get malnutrition in your early years, your brain development is as such that the rest of your life, it has that knock-on effect. So investment in that early time makes just a lifelong difference to that child.
The income in Tanzania, let's talk about that in difference.
So when we did our survey, I said of the first 100 babies we worked with, what we discovered was that the average income of a female caregiver that was taking on a baby whose mother had died, the milk alone was 2 to 3 times more than her monthly earnings in total. So imagine you're a grandmother, your daughter's just died, you desperately want to take in the 3 kids that she's left behind, but the milk alone is going to cost you 2 times everything that you earn that month. That's forgetting every other expense that you have. So you're really leaving people in impossible situations if you put that burden on them. And we were getting phone calls from a village hospital saying, this grandma wants to abandon the baby in the hospital. And we're like, oh, that's so sad, we're going to have to find another family. And when the social worker would get there, he'd talk to the grandma and say, why are you abandoning this baby? And they said, well, why would I take it home to die? I can't afford the milk, and I don't want to watch it suffer. And we said, oh, well, if you had the milk, would you still not want it? He said, no, of course not. I just don't want to watch the baby die. And it was a real education for everyone to realise, wait, this wasn't lack of love. This was actually an act of love. Because if you don't have the means to feed a child, it's it's excruciating to say. I don't want to watch it suffer. So yeah, families are living on, and I think it's an important thing for people to imagine. You know, there's one lady I think of. She'd taken in 12 children, and she used to say to me, I won't tell you how many of them I gave birth to, but it wasn't the majority. Actually, it was 2, but she would always tell you, I won't tell you how many I gave birth to, but she had taken in 10 children of her relatives and just said yes and yes and yes. And she was the most loving woman, the heart of gold. And when we met her, she was going around the streets. Literally, she was like the most, you know, proud woman. And she had this tiny baby. And she said, look, my sister-in-law just died and I can't afford to feed it. And I'm just asking for help. And over the years, she became one of the most amazing women because she had nothing to give, but she wouldn't give up on those kids. She was like their biggest advocate. She fought. One of the children the older kids that was left behind had severe disabilities. And again, she advocated like you couldn't believe to find the support that child needed. And she's now one of our mentor mums who comes in and talks to other families because her story of and she always says to you, you know, how you know you're doing the right job is I've raised kids that weren't mine, but they returned to me in adulthood and I poured love into them. They never knew that I wasn't their mother. I stood as their mother. And that's all that life matters. And she just had such a zest for her, but she didn't have the means. And I think what the most beautiful part of our work is if you can give people like that the tools they need to be these incredible mothers, community leaders. You know, she inspires so many people now. It was just the lack of means that was holding her back, but she had so much to give. So I find people like her, like the reason that I get so inspired to keep going is there's amazing people. They just might not have the means to the physical or the money, essentially.
Georgina, I want to thank you for your time. I have truly, I wouldn't say enjoyed my conversation because this has been a tough conversation to it's a tough pill to swallow when you're hearing 0 to 2-year-olds are being abandoned. But I've enjoyed my conversation in the sense that I've learned so much about where help is needed, what support is required, what goes through these individuals who've lost their children and in turn have to take care of their grandchildren and sometimes even give them away. So yeah, this one's been a tough one for me, but I admire your inspiration to continue doing this. I really do. I admire you for what you do. And I just pray that you can continue doing this and continue supporting these beautiful children and mothers and families out there.
Thank you, Shruti. That's very kind of you. It's been really nice to be able to share. You know, I'm in a little town in small Tanzania, so it's nice to be able to share with other people, you know, what we're up to here. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.